Going to talk about density again, but this time we're going to kick it up a notch. And what do I mean by that? Well, we've been practicing calculating density when we're given both the mass and volume of an object. But what if the mass or the volume is the unknown variable? How do we go and solve it from there? So what's the formula for density again? Hopefully you said that it is mass divided by volume. And you'll notice that we have here what the units are if it's a solid, and over here what the units are if it's a liquid. So it's either going to be grams per cubic centimeter or grams per milliliter. Is there an easier way to use a formula? Well, that's a good question. And the answer to that is, well, maybe. It depends on what works best for you. You can use the formula from the last slide, or you could use what I call the magical triangle. And here is the magical triangle. And so here, if we put our variables, density, mass, and volume in this triangle, we can easily solve the unknown variables by covering up what we don't know. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here, the question is, what is the density of an object that has a mass of 40 grams and a volume of 20 milliliters? Well, as always, pull out your variables. What do we know and what do we not know? Well, we don't know density, but we know the mass is 20 grams and we know the volume is 20 milliliters. So how do I use this triangle to help me do the math? I cover up what I don't know, so I don't know my density. So I'm left with mass and volume. And so how do we set that up mathematically? Well, it's going to be mass divided by volume. So this little line here is going to indicate division, and this line here is going to indicate multiplying because they're side by side versus on top of each other. So let's plug in our numbers. So I know that my mass was 40 and my volume is 20. So I plug it into the formula like this. And what is our answer? Hopefully, you said it is 2 grams per milliliter because 40 divided by 20 is 2. All right, that one was an easy one. Let's try another one. So here we have an object that has a density of 3 grams per milliliter and a volume of 9 milliliters. What's the mass of the object? So first we pull out what we know and what we don't know. And we know the density is 3 grams per milliliters, but we don't know the mass, but we do know the volume is 9 milliliters. So how do we now use this triangle? Well, I don't know mass, so I'm going to cover it up. And so now what does it look like we do? Now it looks like we take our density here and we're going to multiply it by volume. And we end up with mass equaling density times volume. So when we plug our variables in, we end up with 3 grams per milliliter times 9 milliliters. So 3 times 9 is 27. So now what if we don't know the volume? An object has a density of 4 grams per milliliter and a mass of 20 grams. What is the volume of the object? Well, pull out our variables. I know that density is 4 grams per milliliter. Volume, we do not know. And mass is 20 grams. So I'm going to cover up the V. So now we're left with the M and the D. And the way it is set up, it is going to be mass divided by density. So now if I plug in my numbers, my variables I know, I end up with 20 grams divided by 4 grams per milliliter. And 20 divided by 4 gives me 5. So the answer is 5 milliliters. All right. So now it's your turn to practice. Now we have an object that has a density of 2 grams per milliliter and a volume of 5 milliliters. What is the mass of the object? So what are the variables? Well, density is 2 grams per milliliter, mass is the unknown, and volume is 5 milliliters. So what are we going to cover up? We're going to cover up the m because we don't know that. And we are left with density and volume. And that ends up being mass equals density times volume. So can you plug the unknown or the variables in and solve? So we end up with 2 grams per milliliters times 5 milliliters. So 2 times 5 is 10. And the unit for mass is grams. All right, one more practice. What if we don't know the volume? So an object has a density of 6 grams per milliliter and a mass of 36 grams. What is the volume of the object? Pull out your variables. So density is 6 grams per milliliter, volume is the unknown, and mass is 36 grams. So cover up the V, and we are left with mass divided by density. So volume equals mass divided by density. So let's plug in our numbers. And we are left with 36 grams divided by 6 grams per milliliter. 36 divided by 6 is 6 milliliters.